Hello and welcome to Dartmoor, and in this video I'm going to be using the D850 feature called focus shifting to create a focus stacked image in Photoshop of the beautiful Venford Falls. So what is focus stacking? Well, quite simply put, it's taking a series of images, each at different focus points throughout your scene. Now normally you set your camera up to use a sweet spot of the lens. For most lenses that'll be somewhere between f5.6 and f8. This is where the image sharpness and crispness that you get is at its maximum. And by taking a series of images throughout the scene, you're taking sharp images at different layers, which then back in post-production, you will combine them together, normally using a tool like Photoshop, and it will layer all the sharp areas of each of the frames into a single layer, and therefore you should end up with an image that is really sharp from the closest foreground object all the way through to the furthest away background object. So taking a lot of images and then having to stack them in Photoshop and post-process them all probably sounds like a lot of work to a lot of people, probably including myself. But why not just take a single image and use an aperture like f16 or f18? It is completely possible to get a sharp image using an aperture like f16 or f22, but most lenses, when you get down to those kind of apertures, the images can get a little bit soft. So it's not always ideal to use a single frame at that aperture, and sometimes it's actually just impossible to get enough sharpness, particularly if you're photographing up really close subjects and you want to get sharpness from the very closest subject all the way to the furthest out. So while you can make it work, and it often does, but sometimes there's a bit of compromise in the image quality when you're using your lens at f16 or f18. By using focus stacking, you're getting over those limitations of the lens, and hopefully this will deliver a really sharp image from front to back. Okay, so for this video, I'm going to be using the Nikon D850, and it has a feature in it called focus shifting. Now, there are two ways you can do a focus stack. The first way is you can actually just do it manually. You can go in and select a focus point, and you can take a series of images, manually changing the focus point as you go through the scene. The Nikon D850 has a built-in capability called focus shifting, where you can tell it how many shots you want, what the gap should be, and it will just go ahead and take the shots for you automatically. Now, what it doesn't do is it doesn't actually combine those shots into a single file, so you still need to post-process them, but it just takes a little bit of the work out of having to take each of the shots manually. You can just set it to go automatically, and it will take all those shots for you. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do here, and then when we get back home, I'll show you how to post-process them. Now, the post-processing will be the same whether I took it with the D850 or I manually did it on some other camera. So we'll cover the process from start to finish. Okay, now that you know what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, why don't we go down to the falls there, I'll set up the camera and I'll talk you through the process. Okay, so I'm down at the falls here and I've got my camera all set up. Now obviously I've got it on a really sturdy tripod, tried to make it as level and as stable as possible. I've got the camera in the vertical orientation. This is to help me with my composition, which for this particular location, I'm going to include this little green triangular rock here, and then throughout the frame it's going to lead out until we get to the twin waterfalls of Venford. Now I'm not going to really include much above the top of the waterfalls there, because it's just really bright sky. It's overcast, but it's very bright and it will just blow out in the scene. So I'm just going to keep that area of the image minimized and just use the top of the waterfalls as it comes down the frame. I've got my circular polarizer on. There's quite a lot of glare on the water, so I've got that turned up to maximum. This is just trying to take some of those reflections off. And then in terms of the camera setup, I'm shooting at ISO 64. I'm focused at the moment on that rock, and I'm down at f5.6, which is around about the sweet spot for this particular lens. It's given me an exposure time, I think, of about 1.6 seconds. So I've taken a test shot and I've just checked it's all exposed correctly and it's sharp in the front of the rock. So I'm pretty happy with the camera setup, my composition. Now let's go into the menu system with the D850 and set up the focus shifting. Okay, so just to make life a little bit simpler for video, I've swept the camera back to its horizontal position just so we can see the menus. So I'm going to click in menu. In the photo shooter menu, I'm going to go to focus shift shooting. Right, I've got a number of options here. So I'm going to go into number of shots. So this is the number of the shots that the camera will try and take as it steps through the scene. I'm not going to need 30 here. I'm probably just going to try 5 or 6, because I don't have, thinking about it, from the rock all the way to the back of the waterfall, it's actually a relatively short distance, so I'm not going to need a lot of shots. So let's go for 5. And really, when setting this up, it's going to be a matter of just finding out what works best for a particular scene. There's not really a hard and fast rule to do this. You're just going to have to work with it. Focus step width is just how big a gap between each of the focus points the camera will jump through. I like to keep it at 1, but maybe for this scene we don't need small gaps. Let's go for somewhere maybe about 3. Yeah, I'm going to go 3. Interval to next shot, so you can leave it a gap in between each shot. I don't want it, I just want it to keep shooting all the way through. Exposure smoothing, I don't need them on manual, everything's fixed. Silent photography just means the mirror's going to be up all the time, so don't really need to worry about that either. And then after I've got all those options set, it's just a matter of hitting start. I'll quick start, even though I've got to reposition the camera just to show you what happens. It just says preparing, and then it goes through and shuts it. So I'm going to reset the camera back up, and I'm going to configure it all to tape the scene, and then I'll come back and show you what it all looked like in image review. As you can see, I've got the camera back in its vertical orientation. Just going to make sure I've got my exposure levels right. I'm going to focus on the closest object, which for me is that green rock. I can quickly zoom in. Yep, that's looking sharp. Got that set up. Go into menu, focus shift shooting. I've got all the options that I set earlier, and all I do is click and start. And the camera will now go through and take a series of shots. So I've come up from the waterfall, mostly because it's quite noisy down there. Obviously it's a waterfall, there's a lot of water, so I just wanted you to be able to clearly speak to you. So even though I've got a lav mic on it, it's still quite noisy down there. So the bit I'm going to explain now is how I've gone through and reviewed the images. Now this is exactly what I did down there when I got the camera, took a series of shots. I'm going to have a look back on the back of the LCD screen, and I check the pictures, and I check that I've got a frame for each of the critical focus points that I need to do the focus stack. So let's have a look in the back of the camera and check that I've got them. Okay, so let's take a look at the images in the back of the screen. So if I hit play, first thing you notice, I've taken a picture of my hand. You may be wondering why on earth I took a picture of my hand. Well, really, when I import these into Lightroom and I put it on grid view, the picture of my hand shows me that this is the start of a sequence. So it just allows me to quickly identify the fact that the next few shots need to be grouped into a stack, either for panoramics or for focus stacking like we're going to do. I could use the time and date stamp, but that's a nice visual cue. So let's go to the first shot, and we double tap there, and we'll have a look at my foreground rock, and that is pin sharp, absolutely brilliant. So we'll just pan up the image to the base of the falls, which is the next one, and we just scan through the shots, and we should see that getting sharper and sharper. There we go, that's about image number 4, and that looks all sharp. And if we go up to the back of the falls, and we press that, there you go, it's sharp at image number 5. So I probably didn't need the 6th image, but there's no harm in having them. So if you do find that when you look through it and it's not quite worked out right, and you either need more images, then you can just go into the menu options and shoot the whole sequence again, adjusting the parameters until you get everything that you need just right. So as you've just seen there, I've got all the images I need now to do my focus stack. Now I could have done this manually, as I said, but you could do it if I didn't have the Nikon D850. I could have manually gone through and selected the focus point and taken a series of images. So this is really just about time saving. One of the questions you might have is, and obviously I did about I think 5 or 6 shots for this one. Why didn't I just do a really small step and set it to 300 and just let it go and take a bunch of pictures? Well, yeah, you can do that, and you're almost going to guarantee that you're going to get all the images that you need. But you just need to bear in mind that when you get home, you're going to need to import all these, and they're 50 meg files on this card. And while I've got a computer with lots of storage and lots of processing power, not everyone's as lucky as that. So you don't want to necessarily take 300 shots. And bear in mind, you're going to have to load those into Photoshop. It's going to have to align them, and then it's going to have to do all the grunt to actually create that focus stack image. So you don't want to necessarily give Photoshop more work than is absolutely necessary. So, you know, you just need to find the right number of shots and the right step width for that particular scene. Right, so I've got all the images that I need, so it's time to go home and get them into post-processing and create a final stacked image. I'm quite glad to be leaving as well because it's pretty still here. There's not much in the way of wind, and I think the midges and the bugs are out and it's starting to get a little bit uncomfortable. Also back home, when we look at post-processing, I'll show you one of the images that I took last week when I was also doing some focus stacking. It's a slightly different scene, it's a coastal scene, and there were some additional complexities there around the post-processing, so I'll show you that as well. So why don't we go home, let's do the post-processing, create our stacked image, and we'll maybe even make a print. Okay, I'm back home now, so let's jump straight onto the computer and post-process the images. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom. So this is actually the final image. This is what we're gonna post-process into. So we've got a really sharp foreground here, all the way up to the background there. So that's what we're gonna do. Here are the images that I took. So I've got them logically grouped in Lightroom into a stack. So these are the 5 images that I've got, and we're gonna edit these in Photoshop now to hopefully create this final image. So to get things started, we just select the images that we want to load into a stack. So it's at 5 there. We right hand click and we go down to edit in, but we don't do edit in Photoshop, we do open as layers in Photoshop. So this means if we did that, it would open up each of the different raw files as separate windows. We want to open it up in the same file basically, but each of those different images as layers. And Photoshop will go through and it will load each of those images as a different layer, as you'll see them being populated down here on the right hand side as that goes through. Okay, so we've got our 5 raw files here and we're ready to start doing the focus stacking. So the first thing we want to do is we want to align these layers. Now, even though I shot these photographs on a tripod, there's always a risk of a tiny little bit of camera movement between frames, particularly as the camera changes focus. So I'm going to select all the layers. I'm going to go up to edit. I'm going to go down to auto align layers. I'm just going to leave that on automatic and we're just going to click OK, and the computer will go through and it will try and align all those layers. Okay, you can see that it's automatically aligned there. You can see I've got a little bit of cropping down here where it's had to move some of the images about, so only a small amount, but I think we've got everything there we need to work with to do the focus stack. So just before I actually do the focus stack, let me show you how the sharpness changes throughout these images. So we just zoom into this rock here. So the top layer at the moment is the first of the picture, so you can see how that's all sharp there. If I turn that layer off and then go to the next picture, you can see how the focus has dropped off a little bit. If I come up here and I go to the next one, you can see how this goes sharp, and then the next one, that goes soft and goes further back throughout the scene. So you can see how these different images at different focus points have given sharpness throughout the image. So what we'll do now is we'll stack them all together to create one super sharp image. Right, so let's focus stack these images. So I need to select all the layers. I'll go up to the edit menu, down to auto blend layers. I want to stack the images. I want Photoshop to try and blend the tones and colors for me and fill out any gaps that might appear around the edges. I'll click OK. And Photoshop will go along and do all its clever stuff. Okay, and that is Photoshop has done its stuff. Okay, so here we've got Photoshop with its final stacked layer here. You can see how it's used masks for each of the different layers here. Very complex, very clever computing algorithms to do all that kind of stuff. But we got our final image here. So if I zoom into the rock here, you can see it's sharp there. And if I scroll up a bit, I can zoom in here and you can see this is sharp as well. So overall, pretty happy with that single layer. So I'll just save this file off now and we'll return to Lightroom. So once we're back in Lightroom, we can open up our file and we can just do all the edits that we would normally do with any other photograph. So go back here. Here's the file that came out of Photoshop. I've just gone through and just my normal exposure, contrast, highlights, a bit of luminance, masking for some areas, essentially to create this final image, which has sharpness right at the front and sharpness all the way to the back. So really, the actual process of creating a focus stacked image isn't that difficult. Photoshop automates a huge amount of it and makes it very easy to complete. Okay, we're going to look at a more complex example of sometimes where Photoshop with its automatic blending can get into a bit of trouble and how we might resolve those issues. So here's a completed image. It's a coastal scene here of bed, roof and steps with the pink thrift and the coastline there. Not taken on a particularly great day, as you can see, very hazy in the background there, but it's a pretty good example. So if we zoom into this picture, this is a completed one. So right at the foreground here, I've got this plant here, and it's sharp all the way through the scene, all the way to the back. Now, that could potentially be quite difficult to get because these objects were very close in front of the camera all the way back. So this is a great example of where focus stacking comes into its own. But as I'll show you in a minute, when I focus stack the image, there are some challenges because of the waves here. Okay, so let's have a look at my source images. So for this one, I took a lot more photographs because I had a lot more depth of field to capture at a shallow aperture. I think I shot these ones at 5.6, f5.6, so quite a shallow depth of field. So there's 19 images captured, but I'm not going to use them all. So the first one is focused on the green plant in the corner there. But if we look back here at the last shot, shot number 19, if I look back here, all the way back, you notice that the coastline, the farthest away objects here on the coastline are actually not sharp. They've gone past the point sharp. So I'm actually going to scan through the images because there's no point in asking Photoshop to process more than it really needs. So it's probably around there. I think it's that one is the last of the sharp objects. So for me, that's image number 14. So I'm only going to load images 1 to 14 into Photoshop. I can disregard those last ones. There's image number 14. We'll select the first one, and we're just going to do edit, and we're going to do open as layers in Photoshop. This will take a little bit longer because there are more images to load, but it's exactly the same as what we did last time. Okay, so we've got our layers loaded into Photoshop. So we can have a quick look again at how the sharpness moves throughout the image. So if we take this kind of midpoint here, if I start turning off the layers, you can start seeing, see it's kind of focus along here, turn that one off, turn that one off. It's just about here now. I keep going through the scene. So you can see how that plant there, that green plant, is now going to focus. So you can see where the camera has been taking the series of shots at the different focus points. So what we need to do now is to align the layers. So we just do select the first one and the last one, go into edit, auto align layers. We just leave that in automatic, and we click OK. And this again will take a little bit longer. So this is what I'm talking about when I mentioned when I was out in the field. Yes, you could go and take way more shots than you probably think you need, but bear in mind you will have to post-process them later on and get Photoshop to do these things like the alignment. So it's always worthwhile trying to work out how many shots you do actually need. And we'll just let Photoshop do its thing. Okay, so we've got our images aligned. So the first thing I'm going to do before I get to do the auto stack is I'm actually going to duplicate the last layer. So if I just turn these layers off and we have a look here, I'm looking for this kind of last frame here, which has roughly around sharpness around this area here. Now, I know to do this already because I know about the problems with this image, but we're going to duplicate this layer. So we're just going to right hand click it and select duplicate layer. Click OK. So this has given me a copy of the layer. There it is there. Just move that down to the bottom and we'll turn off the visibility for that. So I'm going to align the rest of the layers, and then once that's aligned, it will become obvious why I've made a copy of this particular layer. So turn on all those layers again, select the bottom one, or the second from bottom one, not the copy that we just made. Select the next layer at the top there. We go into edit, and we're going to go to auto blend layers. Same options as before. It's going to take a little bit longer, and we're just going to click OK, and we will let Photoshop do its magic. Okay, so here we've got our final image that Photoshop has processed. Now, if you look here, clearly you can see it's had some significant problems here with the waves because there's quite a lot of movement between the frames. We'll come back to that, and that's why I created that other layer. But if we have a look at the important bit here, we can see this is sharp here. It's sharp all through the frame here, and you can see where it's been making its complex mask. So that bit of the image is fine. We just need to try and correct this bit here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of these original image layers here. I don't need these anymore, so we're just going to go through and delete those. And now we're left with the merged layer here, and we're left with our background copy. Okay, so let's fix this area of the image here. So let's take a look at that layer copy that we did earlier on in the process, and here you can see the waves are as they should be. So that's what we're going to use a layer mask to paint back into the scene. It is important to note that I took the copy of this layer after I did the auto alignment, but before I did the stack. If you do it before you do the auto alignment, that particular layer might be slightly not quite aligned with the rest of them, so when you paint it in, you're going to get more artifacts. So it's important to make that copy after the alignment, but before you do the focus stack. So fixing it's quite easy. I'm just going to move that layer copy up to the top. I'm going to create a mask. It's black, so it's revealed what's in the bottom layer there, which is our merged layer. And then I'm just going to make sure it's selected on white. I'm going to take a big paintbrush, and I'm just going to paint in what's in this layer here. Now I'm doing this pretty rough and pretty fast just for the benefits of this video, but you know, you'd obviously take a little bit more time to do this accurately and properly. So if you hadn't done the auto alignment, you might find that this rocky outcrop here has moved across slightly, so you'll get all sorts of artifacts. So that's why it's important to do that. But very roughly, we just do that. And you know, you might have to use multiple layers to paint bits back in. So, but yeah, that's roughly it. Okay, so that's everything I need to do in Photoshop. Obviously, some people will continue to edit in Photoshop, but because my editing tool of choice is Lightroom, I'm going to round trip back to Lightroom and finish it off there. So here we are back in Lightroom, and we're already in the develop module. If I go, this is the final image. If I go back to the start, you can see some of the things I did a little bit of cropping. We'll tidy up some of these artifacts. So if we go back to the final image there, for only a few minutes post-processing, I've got a really super sharp image there with that plant, and all the way back along the coastline up to the area here. It's just a shame actually that the day we took that picture there wasn't any better light. So there we have it. That's how I do focus stacking with my Nikon D850 and a combination of Lightroom and Photoshop. Hopefully I've shown that it's reasonably straightforward. Once you've captured the images, Photoshop actually does most of the heavy lifting for you through its automation. So am I going to use this technique for all my landscape images? Well, of course not. For the vast majority of my images, using apertures like f11, f13, etc., I'm going to deliver perfectly acceptably sharp results. But like most things in photography, it's really good to have these extra skills at hand should you need to use them. So next time I'm maybe at the coast and I'm photographing flowers and I need to get back to front sharpness all the way out from the very closest flower to the furthest away cliff top, using focus stacking will help me achieve a really sharp image. So it's just about having as many skills as possible available to you. So I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do consider hitting that like button, and of course leave me a comment. I do try and read and reply to everyone's comments. I do really appreciate it. And if you did like this video and perhaps you want to see more content like this, please do consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you do, remember to click on the little bell icon beside that button. That way you'll receive a notification as soon as I post up a new video. But until the next one, I'll see you then.